All right, everyone, we're good on all the platforms here. Let me mute everyone if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. We have a big question tonight. The question is, can you be absolutely sure? I think this is a very important question that sometimes we don't bother to ask. And number one, I guess the question is, when we are sure, why are we so absolutely sure? And when can we be absolutely sure? And I think the most obvious time we can be absolutely sure is when God tells us something. Well, the bad news is, at least in this regard, that none of us are prophets, so God doesn't tell us things. But the good news is that God did tell us a lot of things in the Torah, through the Torah. So anything in the Torah, we can be and should be, which may take us some time, but we can be and should be absolutely sure about. There are many things in the Torah which are not clear. And so God gave us a system of how to study the Torah and derive and determine what the Torah is actually saying. And if we are following that system of derivation from the Torah, then we can be sure that we are on solid ground. That aside, okay, although that's a whole lot, that aside, we go through life every single day and we encounter so many different decisions that we need to make, so many circumstances. We have views and opinions on so many things. And I think one of the healthiest questions that we can ask ourselves, and one of the most important questions to ask ourselves when we are very confident about our opinion, is, can we be absolutely sure? The reason why I think this question is very important is because there is a almost absolute likelihood that we have many things that are influencing our opinion which are not objective. And therefore, it's very hard for a person to come to a point of knowing, of having the confidence to know that they're absolutely sure. Other than if we are very arrogant, then it's very easy to come to that determination. The very first story we read in the Torah is the story of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve are told by God not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve are completely dedicated to God. Everything is black and white, clear to them. And I'm specifically, there's nothing to do with the politics. I'm specifically using the analogy of black and white clear, meaning that they had absolute clarity that godly is good, anti-godly is bad. They were clear, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. What happened? What happened was a snake came along. The snake was a cunning snake, which had an agenda. And what the snake has come to represent, as our commentaries teach us, is a voice within us, which is our animal soul, our evil inclination. And the snake comes and brings confusion into Eve. That's what the snake does. Now, there was a very big advantage that Adam and Eve had, and that was that the snake was an outside element. It wasn't a part of them. It was an outside element that came and tried to convince Eve to be confused about what is good and what is evil. And he did that by asking a bunch of questions and getting Eve to say certain things, which led him to be able to say, well, that's not really true, and sort of demonstrating that to her. And because of Eve misquoted exactly what God had said, she said that we're not allowed to touch the tree, otherwise we'll die. The snake pushed her against the tree and said, look, you didn't die, because God didn't say not to touch it. God said not to eat from it. And then they end up eating from it. You know, sometimes we wonder, how was it possible that Adam and Eve, who had clarity, because they did not have an evil inclination embedded within them at that time. So they were clear about what is godly and what isn't. How, I mean, it was a basic instruction. It wasn't, we're not talking about something complex. Don't eat from the tree, right? We've been given those instructions 1,000 times. Little kids, forbidden fruit, they go for it. They're not being commanded by God. They're being commanded by maybe parents who think they're God. But, you know, we test things. We have an evil inclination. But Adam and Eve, their evil inclination was the snake, which was outside them, was not even a part of them. You would think if God commanded them, they would be solid and secure. Here's the very important thing to realize, which will probably help, could potentially help us in many challenging moments of our life. When there is something that is very, very crucial, and it's a life or death situation, right? We know that in a life or death situation, people find strength that we otherwise don't have. The evil inclination, negativity, evil in this world is the exact same way. Negativity finds a strength that it normally doesn't muster up when it's a life and death situation for it, when it's survival. And the snake, the embodiment of evil, knew that this was a matter of life and death. If it can convince Adam and Eve to do something forbidden, then negativity can survive and thrive. But if they don't listen to the evil, evil is history. It's gone. It would have been obliterated. So the snake mustered every bit of strength it had in order to get Eve, and thereby Adam, to eat from the tree. It invested everything it had because it was a life and death situation. So we cannot even relate to we hear the story, but we cannot relate to the temptation, the pressure, the confusion that the snake brought into Adam and Eve at that time. It was extremely overwhelming because evil was desperate. What happened once evil achieved this? Evil became a part of man. All of us, every single one of us, has embedded deeply within us a part of us which is deeply self-oriented, which is basically anti-God. It's doing what we want versus doing what God wants. Now it's a part of us. Now there's no escaping it. There's only working through it, but you can't just dismiss it. It's not possible to enter into any situation in life, or any conversation in life, or any observation of something in life, whether it's an idea or a situation, whatever it may be, without having distortion, without having an element of confusion. Impossible. So first and foremost, if we don't know that, we are already very vulnerable to tripping over ourselves, because we don't even realize that we are always bringing bias into what we do. If we do realize that, we have to remind ourselves repeatedly. And then, even after reminding ourselves, we then have to ask ourselves, okay, well, how can I know whether what I'm doing is right or not? And how can we be absolutely sure? I'm not sure we can hardly ever be absolutely sure. But what we can be absolutely sure about is that we did everything we can to create checks and balances, to say, I've done my due diligence, and now I'm going to do this, or believe this, or follow this, because I've done what I need to do to the best of my God-given ability to have an objective perspective on what is right. And this week's Torah portion, which is a really fascinating Torah portion, it's a very easy read. It's a famous biblical story, but it's much richer. There are many obvious questions as you read through the story. I'm going to pose one of them tonight, and it would be worthwhile to read through it with commentary. There's a lot we can learn about relationship with God and human behavior from this week's Torah portion. And it's the story of when the Jews come to Moshe and say, Moshe, we want to send spies, and God is taking us to Israel. We got the Torah, They messed up with the golden calf. God forgives them. Now we're ready to go to the land of Israel. And they say we want to send in spies. That's what any good, responsible army would do. You send in spies before you go and attack a country. You have to know the terrain. You have to know what you're dealing with, the people. So Moshe, like he's always done, turns to God. And he says, God, should we send in spies or should we not? And God says, Shlach lecha. That's the name of the parsha, Shlach. Send for yourself. And Rashi explains to us that God told Moshe, L'daitecha, according to your opinion, you should send. I'm not telling you whether you should send or not. Ein ani mitzav lecha, I'm not commanding you. You decide, which was a first for Moshe in coming to God, because God instructed them. God carried them like a parent carries a child. And suddenly God says, guess what? Time to grow up. I do not want to do for you, because as long as I'm doing for you, you're not accomplishing. I need you on your own to step up. So Moshe has a conversation with the leaders of the tribes, and they say, we want to go send spies. So they send, Rashi tells us that the time the Torah lists in the first reading yesterday, Sunday's Torah reading, it lists the 12 leaders from each tribe that went. And Rashi tells us ksherim hayu, that they were kosher, they were righteous people, and they were good, and they were all well intended. Everything was great. They're going to go to scout out the land, so they'll know how to attack it, etc. Then the Torah tells us that they went and tells us the details of how they traveled the land, etc. And then the Torah tells us in today's reading, the Torah tells us, Vayelchu vayavayu, they went and they came. So Rashi tells us, as they went to spy, and then they came back. And then the Torah starts telling us what happened, what they reported when they came back. Rashi tells us when it says Vayelchu, why does it say they went and they came back? They went already a few verses earlier. Why does it repeat again? They went and they came back. So Rashi says to tell us that their coming back was with the same attitude as they're going. Meaning that even at the outset when they went, they already had an intention of saying, we cannot conquer this land, before they even stepped into the land. Now, the reason why this is a little surprising is because Rashi just told us yesterday that they were all kosher. They were all upstanding individuals who were all going for the right reason. And then Rashi says when they went, they actually went already with a plan in their head. And in fact, we know that before they left, Moshe went to Yehoshua, his disciple, his primary disciple who would end up succeeding him as the leader of the Jewish people. So he was obviously an enormously great man, whose name was Hosea. And Moshe added a letter to his name and made his name from Hosea to Yehoshua. He added a Yud. Why did he add the Yud? So Rashi says, because now he had a Yud and a Hey at the beginning of his name. A Yud and a Hey is God's name, Ka. It's God's name. And he said, God, I want to make sure God's in your name so that God should save you from the plan of the spies. In other words, he wanted to make sure to reinforce Joshua so that he's not caught up with the spies. So clearly, we see even before they left that Moshe already knew that they were faulty, that they had plans which were not proper. We know that because we know that out of the 12 spies, 10 of them came back with this plan to slander the land and say that we can't conquer it. 2 of them did not. One was Yoshua, thanks to Moshe's assistance. The second was Kalev. Kalev, when they were traveling, he alone stopped when they were passing the city of Hebron, where our matriarchs and patriarchs are buried, and he went to daven there. He davened that he should not get caught up in the plan of the other spies, and with the hope that the other spies also would not ultimately succumb to their plan. That's the story. So here's the thing. The thing is that when the reason why at the very outset, before they even started going, they were all kosher is because in fact they were. These were great leaders amongst the Jewish people. The evil, if you will, energy, or Satan, if you will, the opposition to holiness, however that's represented in the spirit of existence, of the world, of all of existence, knew one thing. If the Jews were to be taken by Moshe into the land of Israel, which was really the plan, then that would be a permanent entry into Israel with the coming of Mashiach, and evil would be obliterated from the earth, which is what will happen when Mashiach comes. So the moment the spies started going, evil rose up with all of its power and mustered every bit of energy it had, because it was once again in a life or death situation, and said, I have to find a way to plant in the minds of these great leaders some form of justification. And when you read the commentaries, by the way, you'll find that they had fantastic justification as to why they shouldn't conquer the land of Israel. Very sophisticated, deep and spiritual justification. But as we learned in today's Hayom Yom that the Rebbe teaches, I think it was today's, that a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, can also dress up as a Hasidic Jew and can give you righteous justification as to why you should do the wrong thing. So the negativity rose up in order to confuse these very aligned, very righteous people. And guess what? Evil was successful. Can you be absolutely sure? Maybe they were absolutely sure. They felt absolutely sure, but were they correct? No one is free from threat of subjectivity, from threat of a personal agenda, from the threat of the evil inclination trying to distort our perspective and bring us into confusion. In fact, we live in an enormous amount of confusion, and that is the state of the world ever since Adam and Eve ate from the tree. So why then did God in fact let them just do this? God knew what was going to happen, because God wanted us to learn from the situation. God wanted us to learn from experience. I always hesitate to say this because it sounds mean, but you know what? We'll use the classic example. Your kid's not going to learn how to ride a bike until you let go of it, right? There's a great parenting book called The Blessing of a Scraped Knee. You may know of the book. It was very popular a few years back. The Blessing of a Scraped Knee. There's a blessing to a scraped knee, because there's something your kid will learn only if you let them scrape their knee. If you never let them do that, there are things that they will never learn, very basic and important things that they will never learn. Right? Like I shared this morning. When I was a teenager, so I used to bike to high school every day. I lived in a rural, similar to Bucks County type of an area. It was very hilly, Spring Valley, Muncie, New York. I was very proud of my Ross speed bike, my pride and joy. I saved up money and bought the bike. I think for like it was $100 then. That's how many years ago is that? I don't know. Maybe I don't want to know, but 30 something years ago. And I used to bike and I used to bike with my hat on. Now I used to go down these steep hills very fast, and I had this perfect angle so my hat, while it was on my head, wouldn't blow off. One of my big achievements in life. So I used to bike to school every day. Now I lived, I think about 2 miles from school. So I used to bike there and bike back. And when I would bike back, I would ride through a junior high school that was literally a block from my house, the driveway, but it was a long driveway. And I used to, when I was biking back home, I would enter through the back area where the building was, and then I would go down this long driveway all the way to the front. And then when the front of the driveway of the school came, took me right onto the street that I lived on. Up the block, further up the block on the street was a high school. That high school was probably 95% African-American students. One day I'm riding my bike all the way down this, I can't remember exactly how old I was. I was maybe 15. I don't know, something like that. I'm riding with my hat, my jacket, my hat and jacket. And I'm riding down this long driveway. And literally as I'm coming towards the end of it, at least in my mind at that time, but I probably wasn't far off. The high school must have just gotten out, and literally like 50 students turned the corner onto the driveway of the high school. So I'm literally coming right to them. So I slow down, I continue going. A guy takes his school bag and swings it right on my head. So he knocked off my hat. That knocked off my hat. The wind didn't, but that did. What do you do? It's a very tricky situation. I was literally surrounded by at least 50 students. And I got off my bike. I remained poised. I was very scared inside, but I remained poised. I got off my bike, put on the kickstand, went to get my hat. That second, this was like literally, I believe it was an angel from God, because it made no sense to me. That second, a car from the street is driving down the street, pulls sharp turn right into the driveway. A white guy jumps out. He asked me if I'm okay. I don't even know how he saw me, because you don't really see it from the street. So that's why I think it was really like a special thing. He stayed there until I got my hat, got on my bike and left, and then he left. That was the story. Right? So it was a moment in time. Was it a surprising event that happened to me? It didn't surprise me at all that it happened. High school kids with their biases, me with my biases, although my biases didn't play a role in this, right? Did their thing. Hopefully they grew up like I grew up, and hopefully they've had more experiences and expanded themselves, and it's all fine. It is what it is. But we live, this is the reality. The reality is that every human being lives with biases. So we live in a time of confusion of good and evil. So what do we do in order to help ourselves from these biases? The one thing that we can do that we don't really like to do is to broaden our perspective by listening to other people who have a different perspective. Instead of yelling down the people that we disagree with, hear them out, and maybe you'll continue to disagree with them, especially if you happen to be make more sense, you may continue to disagree with them. However, you will actually take time to understand them, to be able to see if objectively that person has a point. Because I will guarantee you that if you do this enough, you will discover that many people do have a point. You may not agree with them entirely, but they will. There are elements to what they're saying that you'll say, "Oh, wow, that actually is correct." And that actually is what makes us less subjective people and more objective people. And I would say that in the environment that we live in, where people are so divided, so extremely divided, we have to really ask ourselves a serious question. And that is that if I am entrenched in one side, meaning that I cannot actually have a conversation and try and understand somewhat the perspective of the other side, whether I'll end up agreeing with them or not, I should be open to the possibility of agreeing with them, because that's someone who pursues the truth, wants to really know all sides of the story, right? And even if I don't, at least now I checked out the other side to verify more accurately that what I'm thinking is actually correct. Until we do that, there's absolutely no way of even thinking that we can be sure. As long as we just speak with like-minded people, there's no way of even thinking that we can be sure. And that's why I have conversations with many people, and I actually have certain conversations deliberately with people who have a very different viewpoint, simply because I want to hear what they're going to say. And it's true that very often I don't feel that they're going to change my opinion. And it is true that when I'm open to being honest and true, I will typically hear a few things that are correct from their side, and we'll be able to hopefully acknowledge that. And we then become part of the solution instead of the problem. If we are in the extreme right or we are on the extreme left, whether it has to do with Judaism, whether it has to do with politics, whether it has to do with anything, if we are in the extreme right and the extreme left and entrenched there, we are a part of the problem. And if we are willing to hear the other side, and if we are willing to try and find at least one or two things that they are saying that has truth to it, because typically if we don't find any truth in another sensible person's viewpoint, we're probably not being honest. There are probably elements of truth, even though it may not sum up totally to what we agree with, but there may be points, because in a world of confusion, nothing is black and nothing is white. The black has some white, the white has some black. Everything is mixed. And so nothing is purely wrong and nothing is 100% right. That's the nature of the world as it is today. So I'm just advocating for one thing. What I'm advocating for is that every one of us be pursuers of the truth. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes that a person should be mekabel es ha'emes mimisha amrei. This is a very hard thing to do. Accept the truth from he who speaks it. It makes no difference whether they are in my party or they're not in my party. They dress the way I dress or they don't dress the way I dress. They subscribe to this form of Judaism or that form of Judaism. We have to be able to have ears that are at least somewhat objective, to be able to acknowledge to someone else that, you know what, that is true. I hear what you're saying. That part of it is true, but I still disagree because of whatever, but I do agree so and so. I was having a long discussion with someone about all of the riots that are going on now and all of the destruction that's happening because of it. And they said, well, look, there's a lot of police reform that's actually happening now because of these riots. And I conceded that there's no question that a lot of I'm not talking about the defunding the police, but I am talking about just basic reform of policy of how far a policeman should go when they are trying to handcuff someone or whatever it is. And I said, in fact, that's a very good thing. That is a very good thing. The question is only what price or to what extent do we permit certain behaviors for what benefits? But there are definitely certain benefits. In other words, it's not as if anyone is absolutely wrong. But and we have to be able to actually look at that and acknowledge those things. And then we will know for ourselves that we have at least some level of objectivity. We're not entirely subjective. And then we become a part of the solution. And I think that when we model that, we encourage other people, because you'll notice when you have a conversation with someone who you're disagreeing with, and you can concede, you can admit to certain things that they're saying to be true, you will make it 100 times easier then for them to admit to things that you are saying. So we become a major solution, because not only are we the solution, but we spread the solution to others and others to others. And it's almost a liberating feeling that people have when they stop just being entrenched and defending what they know is sometimes partially defenseless, by being able to have the liberty and the freedom to actually admit, because you admitted to them. So now they have the freedom to admit to you, yes, what I'm saying is not 100% correct, or this is not the perfect solution, but it is a solution I feel is right. And that's extremely valuable in bringing people closer together. And then also, if in fact you are on the side of the truth, and being able to bring the truth to people who have otherwise been resistant to it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you have any objections, this is one of those objection subjects. So if you have any objections, you're officially unmuted. I'd love to hear them.
Oh, did you unmute me?
No, he did it.
Oh, hi, Rabbi.
Hello.
So anyway, just going back to the biblical story, when I read it, my feeling was that they didn't know exactly what they were going to do, but they had